My name is Brooke Lawson, and for as long as I can remember, I was the afterthought in my family. When people hear the Lawson name, they think of the sprawling skyscrapers, luxury hotels, and multi-million-dollar developments that my family's real estate empire built. But when they heard my name, I was just the girl who didn't quite fit the mold. The girl who walked away. Growing up in the Lawson household was like living inside a corporate boardroom where love was measured in achievements and attention was earned like promotions. My father, Richard Lawson, was a legend in the industry, a man who turned dusty plots of land into landmarks. My older brother, Ethan, was groomed from birth to inherit that empire. He was the golden child, the prodigy, the one everyone bet on. And me, I was the background character in their perfect story. At family dinners, the conversations were always the same. My father and Ethan would discuss market trends, quarterly profits, expansion strategies, language I understood perfectly, but was never invited to speak. When I tried to join in, my father's eyes would glaze over, and my mother would gently redirect me to something more suitable. I was expected to smile, nod, and eventually marry someone who could contribute to the family's growth. I was the daughter, which to them meant I was a future social connection, not a leader. But I didn't want to marry a future business partner. I wanted to build something of my own. When I turned 18, I was offered an internship at Lawson Group, probably more out of obligation than interest. I remember standing in the glass conference room, watching my brother confidently lead presentations while I fetched coffee. They called it learning the business from the ground up, but it was clear that ground level was where they expected me to stay. Ethan would pat me on the back and say, "Don't worry, sis, you'll find your lane, maybe HR or event planning." The moment that shattered whatever hope I had of being taken seriously came during a quarterly review. I had spent weeks developing a tech-driven proposal to optimize the company's property management systems. I poured my heart into it, believing just maybe if I proved my worth, they would finally see me. But when I nervously presented my ideas, my father cut me off halfway through. "Brooke," he said, with that dismissive smile I knew too well, "we don't need fancy apps. We build properties. Let your brother handle the real decisions." He didn't even look at my proposal before sliding it into his briefcase, probably to be thrown away later. Ethan chuckled softly, like he always did when I overstepped the invisible lines drawn for me. That was the day I realized I was never going to earn my place at that table, not in their eyes. I left the company 2 weeks later. No grand announcement, no emotional confrontation. I simply packed my things and disappeared from their radar. My father barely blinked. My brother didn't call. My mother sent a polite text, "Hope you find what you're looking for." What I found was a fire I didn't know I had. I enrolled in a tech incubator program, the kind of place my family would scoff at. I maxed out my savings, worked overnight shifts, and built prototypes in coffee shops while my peers vacationed in Europe. I found people who spoke my language not about square footage and retail leases, but about innovation, disruption, and possibilities. It was in that struggle, far away from the shadows of Lawson Group, that I discovered who I really was. Every rejection letter fueled me. Every failed pitch made me sharper. I stopped chasing my family's approval and started chasing something far more valuable, my own vision. For 6 years, I stayed away. 6 years of silence, of missed birthdays and unanswered calls. Not that there were many. To them, I had simply drifted away, as expected. Another woman who chose not to follow the family blueprint. What they didn't know was that I had built something real, something powerful. The company I founded, PropCore Technologies, had grown from a scrappy startup into a major player in the real estate tech industry. We weren't just surviving, we were leading the innovation wave that was redefining how properties were managed, bought, and sold globally. My name, once insignificant in their world, now carried weight in circles they had yet to penetrate. But none of that mattered to my family. To them, I was still the lost daughter who had walked away from real success. I used to think I would feel bitter about that. I used to dream of the day I'd finally show them, rub my success in their faces. But as the years passed, I realized I didn't need their validation to feel whole. I had already won the moment I chose my own path. What I didn't expect, though, was that our paths would eventually collide again. That my family, the ones who dismissed me, would one day stand in a boardroom across from me, desperately needing my approval to survive. And when that moment came, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt ready. Because I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was Brooke Lawson. And this time, they would remember me. The day my family cut me off wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. No slamming doors, no tearful arguments. It was colder than that. Precise, like a business transaction. It happened in my father's office, 5th floor, corner view overlooking the skyline he had built. I can still picture him sitting behind that mahogany desk, fingers laced, eyes steeled in the way he reserved for underperforming executives. Except this time, the conversation wasn't about a deal or a quarterly target. It was about me. "You've made your choice, Brooke," he said, like he was talking to a stranger. "If you're determined to chase this little tech fantasy, then you'll need to do it without the Lawson name propping you up." There was no anger in his voice, just dismissal. "We will no longer provide financial support, no trust fund access, no credit lines, nothing tied to the company." It landed like a stamp of rejection. I had known this moment might come. I thought I had prepared myself for it. But when the words actually left his mouth, my throat tightened anyway. I forced a steady breath, but I couldn't stop my hands from trembling beneath the polished surface of his desk. "And your shares in Lawson Group?" I asked, my voice thin but still intact. He waved his hand like I was discussing something trivial. "We've arranged to transfer them to Ethan. It's in the family's best interest. You'll be compensated fairly, of course." Of course. It was a clean cut, surgical, the Lawson way. The entire time, my mother sat in the corner chair, not once looking me in the eye. She kept her gaze on the floor, twisting the strap of her leather handbag until her knuckles turned white. When she finally spoke, her words were softer, but no less painful. "Brooke, we just want what's best for you. This isn't your world. The sooner you accept that, the less you'll suffer." And just like that, I was carved out of their story. No more financial backing, no more invitations to family events, no more name on the company's legacy. It wasn't punishment, not in their eyes. It was a necessary correction, a clean break from the daughter who chose the wrong path. I remember walking out of that building, my heartbeat crashing in my ears, my legs somehow carrying me forward even as my entire identity crumbled behind me. The security guard who always smiled at me didn't meet my gaze that day. Maybe he had already heard. I spent the next few days sitting alone in my tiny apartment, bare walls, second-hand furniture, the kind of place my family would sneer at. I kept staring at the severance check they gave me, the so-called fair compensation for my shares, as if money could neatly wrap up the years of family connection they just severed. The truth was, I wasn't just losing financial support, I was losing them. Or maybe I had never really had them to begin with. When your family cuts you off, they don't just pull away their money, they pull away their approval, their time, their curiosity. They stop asking about your life. They stop pretending to care about your milestones. They remove you from the Christmas guest list. They let silence grow roots between you. I kept replaying every memory, every family dinner where I was the quiet one at the end of the table, every ignored idea, every polite dismissal. Was I really that disposable? Was I ever more than just a backup plan? But as the days passed, a quiet sort of rage began to build in me, not the kind that burns fast and fades, but the kind that simmers, sharpens, crystallizes into determination. If they thought I couldn't survive without them, I would prove I could thrive. I didn't cash that check. I didn't want their money. I wanted to build something they couldn't control, something that couldn't be bought back into the family portfolio. So I got to work. I scraped together what savings I had left and took on a second job to fund the first version of my product. I worked 16-hour days, sometimes more, building wireframes, writing code, pitching investors who saw me as too young, too risky, too unproven. I slept on friends' couches when I couldn't afford rent, lived on instant noodles, and turned rejection into rocket fuel. There were nights I questioned everything, nights when their absence felt like a hole in my chest, when I wondered if I should have just played the part they wrote for me. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized I never wanted to be rescued by their money or comforted by their acceptance. I wanted to rescue myself. It took years, but I built something real, and every milestone, every tiny victory, stitched me back together stronger, smarter, and far more resilient than the girl they pushed away. Looking back now, I realize that when they cut me off, they set me free. They thought they were closing the door. What they didn't know was I had always planned to build my own house. The thing about starting over is that nobody claps for you. There are no banners, no welcome speeches, no safety nets waiting to catch you when you fall. It's just you, the weight of your own ambition, and a long road where every step forward feels like a gamble you can't afford to lose. After my family cut me off, I disappeared from their world, but I didn't disappear from mine. If anything, I stepped into it for the very first time. I called my company PropCore Technologies because, to me, it was about rebuilding from the ground up, laying a foundation where I could stand on my own. I didn't have capital, I didn't have partners, and I certainly didn't have my last name to open doors anymore. What I did have was an idea and a stubborn refusal to let their rejection define my worth. The early days were brutal. I worked out of cramped co-working spaces, sharing internet with strangers who were also chasing dreams no one else believed in. I pitched my platform to anyone who would listen: landlords, property managers, even small-town real estate agents who barely used email. I heard the word no so many times I started keeping a tally on my apartment wall, like some kind of battle scar collection. But slowly, inch by inch, the doors started to crack open. The first breakthrough came from a mid-sized property firm that had been struggling to manage its residential portfolio. They were desperate, overworked, and drowning in manual paperwork. I remember sitting in their conference room, my laptop perched on a wobbly table, walking them through the features I had spent countless sleepless nights building. I knew the system inside out because I had written every line of code myself. When they signed the contract, I walked out into the parking lot and cried, not because of the money, it wasn't much, but because it was the first time someone believed in me without needing to see the Lawson name attached. That deal led to another and another. Each client was a brick, each lesson a beam. I built carefully, quietly, while my family stayed oblivious to the company that was rapidly taking shape just outside their line of sight. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. What drove me wasn't revenge. It was something deeper, a hunger to prove to myself that I could do this, that I was more than the daughter they had written off. The growth wasn't overnight. It took years of clawing forward. I reinvested every dollar, skipped vacations, and worked through holidays while my brother posted pictures from yacht parties and ski trips. I hired a small team who shared my vision, people who weren't legacy hires, people who believed that the future of real estate wasn't about owning more buildings but about managing them smarter. We developed proprietary algorithms that predicted maintenance cycles, optimized occupancy rates, and integrated with smart home devices. What started as a simple management platform evolved into a powerful ecosystem that saved clients millions. The industry began to notice. Investment offers started rolling in from venture capitalists, from people who had once dismissed me as an underdog. I accepted funding from those who saw the potential, not from those who wanted to buy my last name. I kept my identity guarded. PropCore wasn't branded around me. It wasn't a vanity project. It was a living, breathing company that stood on its own merits. Few people connected me to Lawson Group. Fewer still knew I had any relation to the empire that once abandoned me. I wanted it that way. My name had once been a cage. Now, it was just a footnote. The press eventually caught on to our success, but when they reached out for interviews, I stayed in the background. I let my head of operations handle most of the public-facing events. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed the work to speak for itself. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have predicted, was that the very industry I had quietly reshaped would eventually circle back to my family's front door. Lawson Group was bleeding. The same old-school systems they had once dismissed as good enough were now crippling them. Their biggest clients were jumping ship, looking for tech-driven solutions that Lawson Group couldn't offer. And PropCore. We were exactly what they needed. One of my team leads walked into my office one morning, a contract request in hand. "It's from Lawson Group," he said, completely unaware of the personal history. "They're looking for an enterprise solution. They've asked if we can expedite the proposal." I stared at the company's letterhead, at the signature beneath the request, my brother's signature. For a long time, I said nothing. It wasn't lost on me that the same family who once saw me as irrelevant was now reaching out to the company I had built from scratch, without their money, without their name, without their approval. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I was ready. Because the girl they cut off, she didn't just survive. She built the future they now desperately needed. I always thought my family's company was unshakable. When you grow up in the shadow of skyscrapers bearing your last name, you start to believe they're permanent fixtures in the world, immune to failure, immune to change. But nothing is immune when the foundation starts to crack from within. I heard the first whispers about Lawson Group's trouble through industry news, brief mentions of slipping profits, stalled projects, and the quiet exit of longtime clients. At first, I didn't pay much attention. I had trained myself to live as if they didn't exist, as if we were on completely separate paths. I had spent so long building PropCore, keeping my head down, that I didn't see the storm coming for them. But it came, and it hit harder than I could have imagined. The Lawson Group, once the pride of my family, was crumbling. Their stubborn refusal to adapt, the same arrogance that had pushed me away, was now costing them everything. While other real estate giants had embraced the digital revolution, they clung to outdated systems like lifeboats on a sinking ship. I knew those systems well. I had once proposed fixing them. I had once been laughed out of the room for even suggesting it. And now those decisions were suffocating them. When I first got the full scope of their collapse, it didn't come from the news. It came from a quiet call from one of my longtime clients. "Brooke, I thought you should know. Lawson Group is desperate. They're losing big accounts. They're scrambling to modernize but don't have the infrastructure." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of those words pressing against my chest in a way I hadn't expected. Desperate. The Lawson name desperate. It wasn't satisfaction I felt in that moment. It wasn't revenge either. It was something else. Maybe a bittersweet ache. Maybe disbelief that I had finally built something so valuable that even the family who once cut me loose couldn't afford to ignore me anymore. I did my own digging. Quietly. Carefully. Lawson Group was on the verge of losing one of their largest contracts to a foreign competitor, one with superior technology, faster reporting, better property tracking. If they lost that client, it would be a domino effect. Suppliers would walk away. Investors would pull funding. Their carefully curated empire would begin to collapse from the inside out. The solution. They needed a technological backbone urgently. They needed someone who could integrate modern systems into their aging infrastructure, someone with the capability and speed to save them. They needed Propcore. Ironic, isn't it? The same company they had once dismissed as my side project was now the key to their survival. The formal proposal request came a few days later. It wasn't addressed to me directly. Of course it wasn't. It was addressed to Propcore's executive team, probably expecting a faceless negotiation. They had no idea that the CEO they were reaching out to was the daughter they had left behind years ago. The signature at the bottom caught my eye. Ethan Lawson. My brother. The same brother who had told me I would never make it without the family's backing. The same brother who laughed when I left. Now, his name sat at the bottom of a plea for help. For a long time, I stared at that piece of paper. I thought about the endless family dinners where my voice had never mattered. I thought about the afternoons in my father's office where my ideas were brushed aside like flies. I thought about the moment they told me I was cut off, told me I didn't belong. And now here they were, unknowingly reaching across the chasm they had created, hoping someone would save them. I walked into my next team meeting, the proposal letter still in hand. They're asking for a full-service partnership, I said, laying the document on the table. Expedited timeline, custom integrations. It's a huge contract. My operations manager glanced at the company name. Lawson Group. Aren't they the... They're my family, I said flatly, cutting him off. They don't know it's me they're reaching out to. The room fell silent. Do you want to pass? He asked carefully. I shook my head. No, we're going to answer them. We're going to give them a proposal, but it's going to be on our terms. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating them. It was about the reality they had to face that the daughter they discarded had become the very lifeline they needed. I would offer them the solution, but I wouldn't offer them the comfort of familiarity. I wouldn't shield them from the sting of realizing who was sitting on the other side of the table. Sometimes life hands you the chance to write your own story completely, unapologetically. And this was my chapter to write. I've always wondered what it would feel like the moment my family would finally see me. Not just see me as the daughter who walked away, not the one who was written out of their plans, but see me for who I had become. I didn't imagine it would happen like this, in a corporate boardroom, surrounded by people in expensive suits, in a building owned by the very company that once cut me out like a bad investment. But life has a funny way of circling back to its unfinished stories. When my team confirmed the meeting with Lawson Group, I made a deliberate choice. I didn't send a delegate, I didn't call in remotely. I went myself. I wanted them to look me in the eye. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my mirror, buttoning my blazer with the kind of practiced calm I had learned over years of silent battles. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. I wasn't that girl sitting in my father's office, trembling under the weight of his disapproval. I was Brooke Lawson, CEO of Propcore Technologies, and I was about to walk into the most significant negotiation of my life. The receptionists at Lawson Group didn't recognize me. Of course, they wouldn't. I had been gone too long. To them, I was just another executive in tailored heels with a portfolio brief in hand. When they ushered me toward the conference room, I caught a glimpse of my family's framed photographs lining the hallway, snapshots of success carefully curated for visitors. I wasn't in any of them. That absence used to hurt. Today, it barely registered. When I stepped into the conference room, my brother Ethan was already there, seated confidently at the head of the table. He glanced up, ready to greet the expected liaison. His smile faltered. His brow creased. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. For a moment, it was just me and him, two siblings who hadn't spoken in years. suddenly face to face in a room neither of us expected to share again. Brooke. His voice cracked on the second syllable, disbelieving. What are you doing here? I placed my briefcase on the table and sat across from him, matching his authority with a quiet, deliberate calm. I'm here to discuss the PropCore partnership, I said as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. But your PropCore. His confusion was raw, his composure slipping like sand through his fingers. I'm the CEO, I confirmed. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. You own PropCore. I tilted my head, my voice steady but firm. I built it. The weight of those 3 words seemed to collapse the space between us. I built it. Not inherited. Not gifted. Built. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling as he gathered the meeting documents. We didn't know. No, I said quietly, my eyes steady on his. You didn't. Before he could respond, my father entered the room, accompanied by 2 senior executives. He stopped abruptly when he saw me. His face shifted through shock, disbelief, and something else, something more fragile. Brooke, he said my name like it didn't quite fit in his mouth. Dad? I greeted him coolly. I thought you... He trailed off, searching for some rational explanation. You're leading this deal. I am, I confirmed. The other executives glanced between us, realizing something was unfolding far beyond the bounds of a typical business negotiation. The room filled quickly. My team, their team, legal counsel, project managers. Everyone sat, unaware that the Lawson family story was silently rewriting itself in the tension between us. I led the presentation, every word measured, every slide a deliberate step forward. I spoke with the confidence I had fought to earn, explaining the integration process, the technological overhaul, and the rescue plan that could stabilize their crumbling empire. I saw the questions flicker in my father's eyes. How did she build this? When did this happen? How didn't we see her? But he didn't ask. He just listened, hands clasped tightly, as if he could hold the weight of his mistakes there. When the floor opened for discussion, Ethan's voice was subdued. He asked technical questions, searching for flaws, searching for cracks in the armor he had never thought I could wear. I answered them all. Not with arrogance, not with cruelty, but with the unshakable poise of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Toward the end of the meeting, my father finally spoke. Brooke, he said slowly, if we move forward with this, you would be the primary authority on the entire project. Yes, I said. Final approval on all key decisions would come through me. A beat of silence passed. And you're comfortable working with us? I closed my presentation folder, leaned back in my chair, and gave him a small, knowing smile. I'm here to do business, I said, and I never mix business with personal feelings. It was the most honest thing I had ever said to him. In that room, surrounded by the polished legacy of the Lawson name, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the one holding the pen. And I was finally writing my own story. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it walks into a room quietly, fully aware of the weight it carries. That's the kind of power I brought with me to the next negotiation. After that first meeting, the shock in my father's and brother's faces lingered in my mind. But it wasn't enough just to surprise them. It wasn't enough to simply return. I needed them to fully understand where I stood now and, more importantly, how far I had come without them. The follow-up meetings were scheduled quickly. Lawson Group didn't have time to stall. They were bleeding out clients. And PropCore was their last viable option to modernize at the pace they desperately needed. The irony was sharp. They would have to rely on me, the daughter they had discarded, the sister they had overlooked. I crafted the contract terms meticulously. They were strict but fair industry standard for the level of service they required. though with timelines and compliance expectations that gave me full control over project execution. I ensured every clause reflected the new balance of power. For the first time in my life, my family would have to follow my lead. When I returned to their headquarters, I was greeted not as a forgotten Lawson, but as a CEO. I shook hands with their executives, listened to their concerns, and calmly explained the process PropCore would implement to save their collapsing systems. No one dared question my authority now. But what struck me most was the subtle shift in my father's demeanor. Gone was the man who once dismissed me as naive. Now, he listened carefully. Now, he deferred to my expertise. Now, he understood what my title meant. At one point, Ethan tried to regain the upper hand. He pushed back on our pricing model, suggested unnecessary adjustments, attempted to insert himself into decisions that were no longer his to make. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't need to. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "You hired us to fix what you couldn't. Trust the process. Or don't. But we move forward on these terms." The room went quiet. He nodded eventually, biting back the instinct to argue, realizing this wasn't the version of me he had grown up with. That version was gone. There's a specific satisfaction in watching the people who once underestimated you now tiptoe around your expertise, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it. As the weeks unfolded, our teams integrated, PropCore's project leads worked side by side with Lawson Group's internal staff, and it became clear just how outdated their processes really were. I didn't humiliate them. I didn't expose their weaknesses to the industry. I simply did the work efficiently, flawlessly, and under my terms. My family had no choice but to follow. Every major approval passed through me. Every system upgrade required my sign-off. Every financial adjustment needed my confirmation. I watched my father, the same man who had once told me I would never understand real business, now pausing mid-meeting to ask for my input. I watched Ethan, who used to pat me on the head like some well-meaning failure, now carefully reviewing his proposals before sending them to me for final approval. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was deeper than that. It was a quiet rewriting of our family's story. There was a particular day that stayed with me, a small, seemingly insignificant moment, but it etched itself into my memory. I was walking through Lawson Group's offices when I overheard one of their senior managers say to a colleague, "If Brooke signs off, the project's solid. She catches things we'd never see." I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn around. But I felt something settle in my chest, a deep, steady peace I hadn't known I was chasing. They saw me now. Not as Richard Lawson's daughter, not as Ethan's little sister, but as the authority in the room. One evening, toward the end of a particularly intense project phase, my father asked to speak privately. I agreed. We sat in his office, the same one where, years ago, he told me I was chasing a fantasy. But this time, he didn't lean back in his chair with that familiar distance. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice low and uncertain. "You built something remarkable," he said slowly, like the words tasted strange in his mouth. I didn't see it before. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I didn't need you to see it." I finally replied, "I needed to see it." He nodded, absorbing that. "Do you ever regret walking away from Lawson Group?" he asked. I met his gaze without hesitation, not for a second. The truth was, if I had stayed, I would have spent my life waiting for their permission to matter. Instead, I built a life where I didn't need their permission at all. When we finalized the deal, when the contracts were signed and the systems fully integrated, my brother shook my hand across the conference table. His grip was firmer this time, his smile more sincere. He knew. They all knew. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to win an argument. Because in the end, power isn't about the loudest person in the room. It's about the one who sets the terms. I used to imagine this moment 1,000 different ways. I thought maybe my father would call me in the middle of the night, his voice cracking with regret. I thought my brother might show up at my door, desperate to make amends. I thought my mother would send a letter, pages and pages of words she could never say aloud. But life doesn't hand us cinematic apologies. It gives us messy, uncomfortable, quiet ones that don't always look like what we've been waiting for. It happened after one of our final project reviews. The prop core integration was nearly complete, and Lawson Group was stabilizing, finally clawing its way back from the edge of collapse. The work was done. The partnership had been professional. The contract was nearly closed. I was preparing to leave the Lawson offices for what I thought might be the last time when my father asked if I could stay a few minutes longer. "Just us," he said, his voice lower, hesitant in a way I'd never heard from him before. We sat in the same boardroom where I'd first walked back into their lives. Only now, the room felt smaller, quieter. The weight of what had happened between us was finally pressing in. My father cleared his throat but struggled to find his opening. He glanced toward the empty chairs around us like he was hoping for a script, some roadmap for this conversation he had never learned how to have. "I've been thinking," he finally began, about how we treated you." He rubbed his hands together, a nervous tick I'd never seen from him, not even during high-stakes negotiations. It was like he was searching for the right words and coming up short. "I always believed I was doing what was best for the family," he said. "But maybe I was just doing what was best for me, and for Ethan." His voice cracked just slightly, but enough for me to hear it, the years of buried emotion trying to surface. "We expected you to follow the path we laid out. When you didn't, I convinced myself you'd come back eventually. I thought cutting you off would force you to fall in line. I didn't." He shook his head, his gaze falling to the table. "I didn't think you'd make it on your own." That last sentence hung in the air, sharp and bare. I waited. I let him feel it. "And now," he continued, his voice quieter, "you've built something that's not just successful. It's essential. We wouldn't have survived without you. I wouldn't have." He finally lifted his eyes to meet mine. "I'm sorry, Brooke, I didn't believe in you when it mattered." It wasn't the grand, sweeping apology I used to dream about. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. It was the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. Before I could respond, Ethan walked in, like he had been pacing outside the door, waiting for his moment. He sat across from me, his usual corporate confidence stripped away. "I should have called you," he said, not looking at me at first. "Back when you left. I should have reached out. I guess I thought you were being stubborn." He finally met my eyes. But the truth is, I was the stubborn one. I thought I had it all figured out, that the family path was the only way to win. I never imagined you'd build something that would outgrow us. There was no jealousy in his voice, just quiet admission, just the weight of understanding. "I've spent the last few weeks seeing how your team works, how you lead. I realize now, I couldn't do what you've done." It was the first time Ethan had ever admitted that to me. "You were always the bold one," he added. "I just never said it." For a long time, I sat there, unsure of how I wanted to feel. Part of me wanted to revel in the victory, to lean into the satisfaction of finally hearing them say what I had always needed to hear. But another part of me, the part that had done the hard work, the part that had built a life without their approval, just felt tired. Because the thing about apologies is this: they don't undo the years that came before them. They don't stitch back every scar. They don't erase the nights you spent wondering if you were enough. But they matter. They always matter. I looked at both of them, my father and my brother. Two men who had shaped my childhood and almost buried my ambition under their expectations, and I simply said, "Thank you for saying that." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't the end of the story. But it was a step. A beginning. As I gathered my things to leave, my father stood and offered his hand. Not as a CEO, not as a man trying to regain control, but as a father genuinely trying to reconnect with the daughter he had finally come to see. We shook hands, and I felt the quiet shift in the air. Ethan walked me to the elevator. If you ever wanted to grab a drink sometime," he said, awkward but sincere. Just to talk. I smiled, a soft, genuine smile. I'd like that. As the elevator doors closed, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already won. Because I was living life on my terms, and for the first time, they were ready to meet me there. People think forgiveness means going back. Going back to old dinners, old routines, old roles. But I've learned something that took me years to understand. Forgiveness isn't an invitation to return. It's permission to move forward without dragging the weight of the past with you. After the project with Lawson Group was complete, after the apologies I never thought I'd hear, I expected some part of me would want to go back to family barbecues, back to the holiday tables I used to be excluded from, back to the version of the family I thought I always wanted. But as I sat in my own office overlooking the skyline I built, in a city I chose, surrounded by a team who believed in me from the very beginning, I realized something else. I didn't want to go back, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had outgrown the space they once offered me. When my father approached me a few weeks later with an invitation to rejoin the family business, not as a junior, not as a token, but as a partner, he meant well. I could tell he thought this was the way to finally bring me home. "It's yours if you want it," he said, genuinely hopeful. "A senior leadership role. Full equity stake. We'd be stronger with you inside the circle." I paused, looking at the contract he'd prepared. The title was impressive. The compensation was generous, but the offer still didn't fit. "Dad," I said gently, "I appreciate this. I really do, but I won't be coming back." He blinked, not understanding at first. "Why not? You've proven yourself. The door's open." I smiled, not out of rejection, but out of peace. "The door's open, but it's not the room I belong in anymore." His face fell, confused and maybe a little hurt. "I've built something that feels like me," I explained. PropCore isn't just a company, it's where I found my voice, where I learned to lead, where I didn't have to prove I belonged every day. He sat back, clearly struggling with the answer. Maybe he expected me to fight for inclusion all over again. Maybe he thought the goal was to come full circle. But coming full circle isn't always the victory. Sometimes the victory is realizing the circle isn't yours to complete. I wasn't angry at him anymore. I wasn't holding the past like a weapon. I could see that he was trying, that he was finally offering me a seat at a table where I'd once been denied. But I had already built my own table. And that mattered more. When I explained my decision to Ethan, he took it better than I expected. "I kind of figured," he said, a little sad, but mostly respectful. "You don't really fit in here anymore, do you?" I shook my head. "No, I don't think I ever did. I just didn't know it then." He offered something I didn't expect. "I'd still like to keep working with you, though, different companies, same projects. I think we'd make a pretty good team now." It surprised me, this genuine shift in how he saw me. Not as his little sister, not as competition, but as an equal. "I'd like that," I said honestly. The beautiful thing about building your own path is that you can choose where it intersects with others. You can choose where it runs parallel and where it firmly separates. A few months later, my mother called. She had been distant throughout the project, not sure how to navigate the new version of me. She had spent so many years being complicit in my exclusion that maybe she didn't know where to start. But she tried. "Brooke," she said, her voice hesitant, "I'd love to have you over for dinner. Just the family. No business." I knew what she meant. No negotiations, no contracts, no power dynamics, just us. For the first time in years, I said yes. When I walked into my parents' house that evening, everything felt smaller than I remembered. The walls, the rooms, even the family stories that once felt like they defined me. But that's the thing, you grow. And sometimes the spaces you grew up in don't grow with you. And that's okay. We shared a quiet meal. No one tiptoed around my career. No one pretended the past hadn't happened. They asked about my work, genuinely interested. They asked about my life, without comparing it to Ethan's. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter trying to earn her place. I was just Brooke. When I left that night, my mother hugged me at the door, holding on a little longer than usual. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I smiled, I know. Forgiveness didn't mean moving backward. It meant I could now visit their world without needing to live in it. It meant I could love them without sacrificing myself. It meant I could choose, and I chose me. If there's one thing my story has taught me, it's this: you don't need permission to build the life you want. For years, I chased approval from people who believed they had the authority to define my worth. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed loyal enough, followed their path closely enough, I would eventually be allowed to take up space at their table. But what I've learned is that some tables will never have room for you, not because you aren't capable, but because those people aren't capable of seeing you. And that's okay. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. We live in a world where family expectations can weigh heavily, where being the good daughter or the responsible child sometimes means sacrificing who you really are to make other people comfortable. But you don't owe anyone your potential, not even your family. You owe yourself the chance to explore it fully, even if it leads you away from the blueprint they wrote for you. I used to think walking away meant failure, that I was quitting on them, on the life they mapped out. But walking away wasn't giving up. It was stepping towards something that felt real to me. It was building my own foundation, even when no one else believed in it. There will be moments when people you love disappoint you, when they dismiss your dreams, when they make you feel small. It will hurt. You'll carry those wounds for a while. But if you're lucky and if you're brave, you'll realize that their failure to see you doesn't define your success. I found peace when I stopped seeking revenge and started living with intention. I stopped needing to prove them wrong and focused on proving myself right. And eventually, the people who truly care, the people willing to grow, they'll find their way back to you, not to control you, but to meet you where you are. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about deciding it won't control you anymore. It's about visiting the places you came from without shrinking to fit them again. If I could offer you one piece of advice, it would be this: build your own table. Set your own terms, write your own story, and if the people who once doubted you want to sit with you one day, let them, but only if they come with respect. Only if they understand they're sitting in the space you built. Your life is yours, own it fully.